Sometimes the only way to stop being someone's collateral is to become the one who holds the debt. The night Evelyn Marsh's stepbrother handed her over to a stranger in a parking garage off Route 9, it was raining so hard she couldn't see the man's face until she was already standing 3 feet in front of him. She noticed his shoes first. Black, Italian, not a single drop of water on them, which meant he had walked from somewhere covered while she had been standing in the open for 11 minutes, soaked through her only good coat. He hadn't been late. He had simply chosen not to hurry. That was the first thing she learned about Calder. He didn't hurry for anyone. Evelyn had been doing her stepfather's books since she was 17, not because anyone asked, because she found the ledgers in the kitchen drawer one January, when the heat had been shut off and she was looking for takeout menus. Something to make the night feel normal. The numbers were wrong, not slightly off. Wrong in the way only happens when someone is lying on purpose and not particularly concerned about being caught. She corrected them, left the ledger on the counter, and said nothing. By February, her stepfather Howard was quietly handing her the accordion folder every month without explanation. She did the work. He didn't thank her. That was their arrangement. Howard Marsh had a talent for treating usefulness as something owed to him. When Howard died, cardiac arrest, March, slumped over the breakfast table in a way that looked almost theatrical. Evelyn assumed that was over. She assumed a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. Her stepbrother Dale was 34 and had never balanced a checkbook in his life. He inherited the house, the car, the outstanding liquor debt, and apparently something else she hadn't known about. Something that predated Howard's death by about 8 years and had been quietly accruing interest the entire time. She found out about it the same way she found out about most things in that house. By overhearing a conversation she wasn't supposed to and being smart enough to understand what she was hearing. Dale owed $340,000 to a man named Calder. He had nothing to offer except a sister who was good with numbers. The parking garage was Dale's idea of diplomacy. He drove her there in Howard's old Buick, told her they were meeting someone about the estate, and kept the radio on the whole drive like that, would stop her from noticing he hadn't looked at her once since they left the house. Dale was a man who confused silence with cruelty, who thought that if he didn't say a thing out loud it somehow hadn't happened. Evelyn had learned at 14 that the most dangerous people in her life were the ones who believed their own omissions. She got out of the car. The rain hit her immediately. A black SUV was idling at the far end of the level, engine running, no plates visible from where she stood. 2 men leaned against the wall to the left, not looking at her. That was the kind of not looking that required effort. Then he came around the side of the vehicle. Calder was taller than she had imagined. She hadn't imagined. She hadn't known to imagine. And he moved the way some men moved when they had spent a long time being the most dangerous person in any given room and had simply stopped performing it. No swagger. No deliberate slowness. Just a man walking across concrete like the geography belonged to him. He stopped in front of her, looked at her once, head to toe, the kind of assessment that was purely functional. The way she looked at a column of figures, finding the error. "This is the collateral," he said. Not to her. To Dale, who was still hovering 4 feet behind her left shoulder. "She's good with numbers," Dale said. "Better than anyone I've ever hired. She kept the books clean for 6 years. Howard never had a single audit problem. I didn't ask for her resume." Calder's voice was low and flat, not unkind exactly, just stripped of anything decorative. He looked at her again. "Can you speak for yourself?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "Do you know why you're here?" She had spent the drive over deciding whether to lie about this. She decided against it. "Dale owes you money he doesn't have. He's offering me as a substitute arrangement." Something moved across Calder's face. Not quite surprise. More like recalibration. "And you're agreeing to this?" "I'm here," she said. "That's not the same thing." The 2 men by the wall exchanged a look. Calder did not. "No," he said slowly. "I suppose it isn't." He looked at Dale then, and whatever was in that look made Dale take half a step backward without seeming to realize he'd done it. "The debt doesn't transfer," Calder said. "It stays on you. She works for me, until I say the account is settled, and if you interfere with that in any way, the original terms come back into effect and you deal with me directly. Do you understand the difference?" Dale nodded too quickly. Dale always nodded too quickly. Calder turned back to Eveline. He didn't offer his hand. "You'll come with us now." It wasn't a question and it wasn't quite an order. It was simply the next thing that was going to happen. She picked up her bag, the one she had packed that morning, because she was not an idiot, and followed him to the car. The house was in the hills outside the city. Not a compound exactly, though the word kept trying to form in her head. A main building, stone and glass, lit from within, the kind of architecture that didn't ask permission from its surroundings. 3 other structures she could see through the rain, connected by covered walkways. Security she could sense but not see, which was worse in its own particular way. She was shown to a room on the 2nd floor by a woman named Renata. No last name offered, no explanation of her role. Who'd told her where the bathroom was, where she could find towels, and that she was expected in the main office at 7 in the morning. Dinner would be brought to the room. There was no lock on the outside of the door. That was the second thing she learned about Calder. His control didn't require locks. She sat on the edge of the bed after Renata left and looked at the wall for a while, allowed herself exactly 1 minute of feeling the size of what had happened to her. Then she unpacked her bag in the precise, methodical way she did everything. Small clothes in the left drawer, reference materials on the desk, the one photograph she'd brought face down for now, and went to sleep. If she was going to be useful, she needed to be rested. The office was larger than some apartments she had lived in. One wall was entirely glass, facing east, and in the morning light she could see the city spread below in a way that made it look theoretical. Abstract, like a problem waiting to be solved. Calder was already at his desk when she arrived at 6:57. She noted that without meaning to. "You're early," he said, not looking up. "You said 7. That's early for most people. I'm not most people." He did look up then. Something in his eyes, grey, not cold exactly, more like overcast, like weather that had been the same for so long it had stopped being weather and started being climate, moved. "Just slightly. Sit down," he said. She sat. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were 3 years of financials for what appeared to be a shipping and logistics company. She could tell within 45 seconds that the shipping and logistics company was largely decorative. "What do you see?" he asked. 11 separate accounts routing through a holding structure in Delaware. The expense ratios are wrong. Too high in Q2, too low in Q4, which suggests either incompetent management or deliberate manipulation timed to fiscal reporting cycles. She turned to the next page. "And whoever did this hasn't reconciled the depreciation schedule in at least 18 months, which means the fixed asset list is fiction at this point." Silence. "The man who did those books," Calder said carefully, "worked for me for 9 years. Then he was stealing from you for at least 18 months and probably longer." She looked up. "Do you want me to find out how much, or would you prefer to keep the fiction?" Calder leaned back in his chair. The chair was the one expensive-looking piece of furniture in the room. Everything else was functional, chosen for use. He looked at her the same way he had in the parking garage. "Finding the error. How long would it take you to audit the last 3 years? Properly? 2 weeks. If you're willing to let me ask questions, what kind of questions? The kind your last accountant apparently wasn't allowed to ask." Another silence. Longer this time. 2 weeks, he said. "You'll have access to the relevant files. Renata will get you whatever you need, and after 2 weeks, we reassess." He went back to his own work. She went back to the folder. They sat in the same room for 4 hours, and he didn't attempt to fill the silence once, which was the third thing she learned about him. He was completely comfortable in quiet. In her experience, men who were comfortable in silence were either very honest or very dangerous. Sometimes both. She found the discrepancy on day 4. Not the small one she had already flagged. The depreciation, the misaligned accounts, the slow leak of funds across 3 years that added up to just over $200,000. That was the visible damage. This was something else. A series of payments coded under vendor maintenance, running back 6 years, each one just under the threshold that would trigger a secondary review. Each one routing to the same shell account, which was then dispersed in 4 directions, which eventually resolved, through 3 more layers, to a private account in the name of a woman she had never heard of. She sat with it for 2 hours before she brought it to him. Calder read the summary she had written. 3 pages, clean, no speculation, only what the numbers showed, and went very still. Not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of someone who was adding this information to something they already knew and adjusting accordingly. "You found this in 4 days," he said. "It wasn't hidden well enough for 4 days to be impressive. My previous accountant never found it. Your previous accountant was the one hiding it." He looked up at her. Only the maintenance coding, the upstream account, that was separate. That was someone else. She waited. This was the moment where she could ask the wrong question and he would shut down, or ask nothing and he would decide she wasn't trustworthy, or say exactly the right thing. She had learned to find these moments in numbers. They worked the same way in people. "The woman the account belongs to," she said. "Is she still alive?" Something in his face changed. Not much, a fault line shifting somewhere deep. "No," he said. She nodded, didn't push. He looked at the papers for a long time. "How much did he take?" "That I can attribute with confidence, 612,000. There may be more in channels I haven't traced yet. Find it all. That will take longer than 2 weeks. Then it takes longer." He stood, walked to the window, stood with his back to her. The city was grey today, clouds low, the kind of sky that made everything below it look like it was holding its breath. "No one has ever handed me a report like this," he said finally, without trying to leverage it. "I'm not in a position to leverage anything," she said. "You hold the debt. You found information that I would pay a significant amount to keep private. Most people in your position would understand that as leverage. Most people in my position would also try to run. Why haven't you?" She considered this. The honest answer, the one she had been quietly sitting with since day 1, was that she had nothing to run to. The house was Dale's. The money in her account was enough for 3 months if she was careful, and she was always careful, and 3 months still ended. The life she'd had before this room wasn't a life she was desperate to get back to. The other answer, the one she wasn't ready to say out loud, was that for the first time in a very long time her work was being taken seriously. "Because I'm not done yet," she said. He turned from the window. Looked at her. "No," he said quietly. "I don't imagine you are." She stayed 6 weeks before she saw it happen for the first time. She had known academically what Calder was. The books told you everything if you knew how to read them. The cash flows, the security costs, the legal fees that were too high to be legitimate, the wire transfers that moved in patterns she recognized as deliberate obfuscation. She was not naive. She had understood from the parking garage that she had not been brought into a legal enterprise. What she hadn't understood was what the weight of it actually looked like up close. She was in the office late. She was always in the office late. It was quieter, she could think, when she heard it. 3 men in the hall, one of them Calder, the voices close enough that she could hear the tone, if not the words. Then a door, and footsteps, and then a sound she did not want to categorize. She did not move for 4 minutes. When Calder came back into the office, there was a bruise forming on his left hand, knuckle side, and he was rolling his sleeve down. He stopped when he saw her still at the desk, looked at her like he was recalculating. "You heard that," he said. "I heard something. Are you going to ask me what it was?" "No," he studied her for a moment. "Why not?" "Because the answer would put me in a position where I'd either have to pretend I was fine with it, or pretend I was more shocked than I am." She looked back at the screen. Neither option is useful. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk and sat down and said nothing. She finished the section she was on. He signed letters. The room was quiet in the way it always was between them. Not uncomfortable, not warm, just honest. Before she left for the night, he said, "You should know that what you're doing here matters. The accounting, the audit, it has protected people I am responsible for." She paused at the door. "You could have hired anyone. I hire people who are afraid of me, he said. They work carefully, but they don't tell me the truth. You tell me the truth. I tell the numbers the truth, she said. They just happen to belong to you. She wasn't sure why that made him almost smile. The problem with Calder was that he was easier to understand than she had expected. That was the problem. Dangerous men were supposed to be opaque, unknowable, defined by their violence and their power and the territory they controlled. Calder was those things, yes. But he was also a man who was up before 6 every morning, who ate the same breakfast 4 days out of 7, who kept a framed photograph on the underside of his desk drawer that she had seen exactly once, by accident, and had never mentioned. He was a man who was exhausted in the way that had nothing to do with sleep. The exhaustion of someone who had been at war so long they had forgotten what peacetime looked like. She recognized it because she wore the same thing. 7 weeks in, Dale called. She was in the courtyard when it happened, the one morning she allowed herself to sit outside with coffee before the work started. The number was her stepbrother's, and she looked at it for a long time before she answered. I need you to come back, Dale said. No greeting. Dale never bothered. Back where? She said. Home. There's a situation. The estate lawyers are asking questions about the accounts, and you need me to clean up something you've done. Evelyn, the answer is no. You don't have a choice. You're not. You're his property over there. You're not. I am not anyone's property, she said so quietly it barely carried. And if you contact me again without a reason that has nothing to do with what you owe or what I can do for you, I won't answer. She hung up. Calder was standing at the doorway to the courtyard. She did not know how long he had been there. She looked at him and did not explain, because she did not owe him an explanation, and he nodded once, which meant he understood. The debt, he said. I want you to understand. The arrangement isn't what Dale believes it is. She waited. You're not collateral, you're an employee. The terminology Dale used was his interpretation of a conversation about labor, which he reduced because it was simpler for him. Something tightened in his jaw. I should have clarified that earlier. She thought about this for a moment. Why are you clarifying it now? Because you just told your brother you aren't anyone's property, and you were right, and I don't want you to think I disagree. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. The courtyard was quiet. Birds somewhere whined in the ornamental trees along the south wall, the distant sound of the city that never fully went away. Calder, she said, I've seen your books. I know exactly what you are and what you've done and how much everything in this house is worth down to the last decimal. I'm not confused about who you are. I know, so stop trying to reframe things for my comfort. I don't need comfort. I need honest accounting. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, very quietly, yes, you do, and then, so do I. Dale's situation deteriorated in the way things do when a person is both dishonest and incompetent, faster than expected, more completely than seemed possible. He had been supplementing the estate's assets with money that wasn't his, and had convinced himself the accounting would hold, because the accounting had always held when Evelyn was doing it. She wasn't doing it anymore. She found out through channels she wasn't supposed to have but did, because information moved in this household, whether or not it was directed anywhere, and she had learned very quickly where to stand to catch it. Dale had gone to a man who knew a man who was 2 degrees of separation from Calder's operation and had used the association, had used her obliquely, the way Dale always used things obliquely, to try to borrow money he had no plan to repay. The response to that from Calder was fast and surgical and left no visible marks. He told her about it the next morning, just that it had been handled, that Dale would not be approaching any affiliated parties again. Did you hurt him? She asked. No. Why not? Because you haven't asked me to. She let that sit in the air between them. It was a strange answer. It was also, she understood, a true one. He had handled it the way he had because it connected to her, and something in the way he had calibrated his response had been adjusted for that. She did not know what to do with that. She did her work. She always did her work. The final reckoning with the previous accountant, a man named Tobias Crane, who had taken employment with a competing organization about 3 months after the account she'd found had stopped receiving deposits, happened on a Thursday. She knew it was coming because the patterns had told her. When the outflow from certain accounts shifted, when specific security contracts began to cluster, when Calder worked late for 5 nights in a row without eating until she put food on his desk and he ate it without looking up. She had become, she realized, the person who put food on his desk when he forgot. She wasn't sure when that had happened. She was there when they brought Crane in, not by design. She was in the hall outside the office when it happened, and she made the calculation. Leave and announce that she was disturbed by what she'd seen, or stay and demonstrate that she was not. She stayed. Crane was not a large man. He had thinning hair and the slightly baffled look of someone who had believed for too long that they were smarter than everyone around them, and was only now beginning to revise that assessment. He looked at Eveline with something that might have been recognition. She had been described to him, probably, as the woman who had found what he'd hidden, and something else, harder to name. Maybe the understanding that he had been undone by someone who had been offered as collateral and chosen honesty instead. Calder didn't raise his voice once. He didn't have to. He laid out with precise and absolute calm exactly what had been taken, exactly how it had been hidden, and exactly what the consequences were going to be. He used her audit summary as the basis for the accounting. She sat in the corner and watched him use her work, and felt something complicated and clean about it. The satisfaction of numbers that had been given their proper weight. Crane left the room without being carried, which was more than she had expected. When the door closed, Calder stood with his back to her for a moment. 6 years, he said. He did that for 6 years, and I trusted his reports. People trust what they're given, she said. That's not stupidity. That's how organizations function. You didn't trust the numbers you were given. I don't trust anything I haven't verified. He turned. There was something different in his face. Not soft. Calder's face was not capable of soft, she had decided. It was the face of a man who had spent 35 years making hard calculations, and the calculations had left their marks, but open, in the way a window is open, letting something in. What do you want? He said. She blinked. What? Out of this, out of whatever the next arrangement looks like. What do you actually want? It was such an unexpected question that for a moment she couldn't locate the answer. She was not accustomed to being asked what she wanted. She was accustomed to being assigned, inherited, handed over, left behind. Want was a different category. To work, she said finally. Real work. Work that matters and that I'm trusted to do properly. You have that. I know. What else? She looked at him. He was watching her with that overcast grey attention that had stopped unsettling her somewhere around week 3 and had started feeling, inexplicably, like the most honest thing in the room. I'd like to be asked questions, she said. Not managed, not handled, asked. Something in his face shifted. I've been asking you questions since the first morning. You've been asking about the books. Yes. A pause. A long one by his standards. I'd like to start asking about other things. The room was quiet. Outside, the city hummed its usual ambient frequency, the sound of a million lives proceeding without reference to this room, this man, this woman who had arrived as collateral and stayed as something else, something that neither of them had a clean ledger entry for yet. All right, she said. She did not move back to the city. She did not go back to the house that was Dale's. The house where she had corrected books by lamplight and been invisible for years. Dale's situation eventually resolved itself in the way situations resolve when the person at the center of them is neither clever enough to sustain a lie nor brave enough to face the truth. Quietly, badly, without spectacle. She heard about it secondhand and felt almost nothing, which was its own kind of ending. She kept the desk in the east-facing office. She kept the work, which expanded as the months turned, because Calder had begun asking what she thought about things beyond the accounting, and she had opinions about structural inefficiencies and risk distribution, and 3 specific arrangements that were going to become problems in 18 months if left unaddressed. He listened, not always, not without pushback, but he listened. One night in late November, when the city lights were spread below them like a second sky, he told her about the photograph in the desk drawer, his sister, dead 8 years. The money Crane had been funneling had been going to the person responsible, had been, he believed, a payment for silence that was also a taunt, a way of saying, I know what you don't know about what happened to her. She listened. When he was done, she said, the account she was paid through. I found 2 more deposits after the last one I documented. I didn't include them in the summary because I wasn't sure they were relevant. He was very still. Show me. She pulled the file she had kept, the one she hadn't known how to present, the one she had been carrying for 2 months because the numbers told a story that was too personal to hand over without knowing it was wanted. She spread it on the desk between them and walked him through it, line by line. Everything the numbers said. It took 3 hours. When they were done, his hand was resting close to hers on the desk, not touching, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. He was looking at the last page, the one that named a name and an account and a transfer date, and left no room for interpretation. You kept this, he said. I keep everything, she said, until I know where it belongs. He looked at her then, at this woman who had arrived in a parking garage in the rain, who had packed her own bag in advance because she was not an idiot, who had walked into a world built on violence and silence and unpayable debts, and had simply, methodically, told the truth about the numbers until the truth was unavoidable. Where does this belong? He said. She looked at the page, then at him. With you, she said. It's yours. He closed the file. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Outside, the city went on being the city, loud and lit and indifferent and alive. Inside, in the room that had started as an arrangement and had become, incrementally, something neither of them had accurate language for. Eveline Marsh sat with the man who had bought her brother's debt and decided that was enough of a starting point for now. She had never needed things to be clean to begin with. She only needed them to be true, and this was true.